Subcontraries and subalterns. Introduction. Remember that in the last chapter we said that there are four ways that any two of the four statements A, I, E, and O can be related in opposition. In other words, any one of these statements can be said to be opposite to another of them in any one of four different ways. They can be contradictory to one another, they can be contrary to one another, they can be subcontrary, and they can be subalternate. In the last chapter, we studied the first two of the four kinds of opposition between categorical statements. We studied contradiction and contrariness. In this chapter, we will discuss subcontrariness and subalternation, the last two of the four kinds of opposition. The rule of subcontraries. Let us begin by articulating the rule of subcontraries. Two statements are subcontrary if they are both particular statements that differ in quality. The difference between contraries and subcontraries is that while two contrary statements are both universal, two statements that are subcontrary are both particular. Two statements that are subcontrary are both particular, but one is affirmative and one is negative. Of the four statements we have been discussing, A, I, E, and O, which one is particular and affirmative? Some S is P, the I statement, is particular and affirmative. Of the four statements, which one is particular and negative? Some S is not P. The O statement is particular and negative. Therefore, the I and the O statements are subcontrary. Let's take a look again at our chart showing the square of opposition. Look at figure 7.1. If we look at the chart and ask ourselves which statements are particular but differ in quality, we see that they are the two bottom statements, I and O. Like contraries but unlike contradictories, there's only one combination of statements that are subcontrary. The two contrary statements are A and E. The two subcontrary statements are I and O. The third law of opposition. Let us now explore a little more what subcontrariness means. Let's start by defining the third law of opposition. Subcontraries may at the same time both be true but cannot at the same time both be false. If one is false, the other must be true. If one is true, then the other may be either true or false. Look at the following statements. I, some S is P. O, some S is not P. If one is false, is there any way the other can be false as well? If one is true, does that require that the other can be either true or false? If I say, some men are mortal, and that statement is false, then it would be impossible for the statement, some men are not mortal, to be false too. If some men are mortal is false, then we know that no men are mortal. And if no men are mortal, then some men are not mortal cannot be false. The rule of subalterns. The rule of subalterns says the following. Two statements are subalternate if they have the same quality but differ in quantity. They are propositions with the same subject, predicate, and copula, one of which is universal and the other particular. Unlike contradictories, contraries and subcontraries, subalterns are really not opposite to one another. But they do have a particular logical relationship with one another that helps to complete the square of opposition. Whereas there was only one combination of statements that we found to be contrary and subcontrary, there are, like contradictories, two combinations of statements that are subalternate. We see in figure 7.2 that there are two pairs of statements that have the same quality but differ in quantity. First, the A statement and the I statement have the same quality. They are both affirmative, but they differ in quantity. One, A, is universal, while the other, I, is particular. A and I, therefore, are subalterns. Second, we notice that the E statement and the O statement have the same quality. They are both negative, but they differ in quantity. One, E, is universal, while the other, O, is particular. E and O, therefore, are subalterns. The fourth law of opposition. The fourth law of opposition applies to subalterns. It says, subalterns may both be true or both be false. If the particular is false, the universal is false. If the universal is true, then the particular is true. Otherwise, their status is indeterminate. In other words, when it comes to A and I statements, if some S is P is false, then we know that all S is P is false. And if all S is P is true, then we know that some S is P is true. It also works with E and O statements since they too are subalterns. If some S is not P is false, then no S is P must be false. And if no S is P is true, then some S is not P must be true. When we say in the fourth law of opposition, otherwise their status is indeterminate, what we mean is, in the case of A and I statements, if all S is P is false, we cannot know whether some S is P is true or false. And if some S is P is true, we cannot know whether all S is P is true or false. And in the case of E and O statements, which are also subalterns, if no S is P is false, we cannot know whether some S is not P is true or false, and if some S is not P is true, we cannot know whether no S is P is true or false. If we said, for example, all men are white, then we know it must be true to say that some men are white. But if we know that some men are white, we don't necessarily know that all men are white. Likewise, if we know that no men are white, then we also know that some men are not white, since some merely means more than one. But if some men are not white, we don't necessarily know that no men are white. Summary. Let us summarize what we have learned in the last two chapters. We learned in the last chapter that according to the rule of contradiction, two statements are contradictory if they differ in both quality and quantity. According to the first law of opposition, two contradictory statements cannot both be true at the same time, nor can they both be false at the same time. We also learned in the last chapter that according to the rule of contraries, two statements are contrary if they are both universal but differ in quality. According to the second law of opposition, two contraries cannot both be true at the same time, but can at the same time both be false. According to the rule of subcontraries, two statements are subcontrary if they are both particular statements that differ in quality. According to the third law of opposition, two subcontraries may at the same time be true, but cannot at the same time be false. We learned that, according to the rule of subalterns, two statements are subalternate if they have the same quality, but differ in quantity. According to the fourth law of opposition, subalterns may both be true or both be false. If the particular is false, the universal is false. If the universal is true, then the particular is true. Otherwise, their status is indeterminate. If you ever get confused about which statements are contradictory, contrary, subcontrary, or subalternate, all you have to do is consult Figure 7.2, where all the relationships are visually illustrated.